Hello, and welcome back to the Can You Dig It podcast, where we dig down, dig deep, and dig into the process of self-discovery and personal growth. As always, I'm here with Jessica Rebella from Unleash Potential Life Coaching. I'm Jordan Knott from the Center for Alignment, bringing you 2+ decades of combined counseling and coaching experience to this wonderful exploration of the theory, but really even more so the application of subjects in mental health, emotional awareness, and personal growth. Today's episode is the third in our anxiety series. We are thinking this is probably going to be the last one before we go into a Q&A on anxiety, but it's possible we're going to flow into a fourth depending on how things go. I'm thinking this is going to be the last one, but we'll see. We will see. So much to review here. Okay, so at the end of anxiety episode 2 that released last week, we got into the etiology, which is like the cause of anxiety, right? Where does it come from? And in a nutshell, I want you to dive into, right? Because you and I talked about this prior to this podcast throughout the week, just now, like what really causes anxiety? Where do you go with that? I know we ended with like the nature versus nurture argument. Is it inborn? Is it conditioned? This and that. And obviously there's a lot of both. There's a lot of both. That's been proven. It's both. DNA holds memory. It is inborn for sure. But then there's items that come up as we're raised that kind of mark and create foundational like superhighways in our brain, right? In regards to what we believe about life. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like what conditions people to be anxious? Where does that come from in a lot of people?
So it typically starts with our attachments to our parental figures. So our attachment to mom and our attachment to dad. And we either have a really secure attachment to those figures or we have an insecure attachment to those figures. And if we have a secure attachment, like that's the goal, right? Like you want to feel secure with your parents, you want to be able to trust them, you want to feel safe, and like that's great. A lot of times people have insecure attachments, and that's where anxiety comes. And how insecure attachments come up too. It's like, is dad or mom an alcoholic and an angry alcoholic, and you never know what's going to happen when they're drinking? Or is there insane financial issues that you never know if you're going to be evicted? Or you never know if there's going to be food on the table because mom and dad might not be able to have food on the table, or they might not be able to go to work because mental illness comes in, right? Like there's so many different factors and so many different situations that come in that lead to having a secure attachment with mom and dad. And as that happens, you navigate through life feeling insecure. You navigate through life feeling not safe, not really knowing your way. Can you trust yourself? Can you trust other people, right? Like it gets ingrained in you down to your core that you can't trust yourself. So how would you trust somebody else? And the more we go on with that and the more that happens, it starts to impact how we view the world. And I know we touched base on this a little bit last time, but like our views of the world is not just the world is crazy, right? It's not just the world is dark and scary. No, we firmly believe that like we are not okay in the world. We are not safe. We are not secure. We are not taken care of. We can't take care of ourselves. Like there's no place for us. And then we rely on survival skills. We just survive. There's no thriving.
So where does that come from? Can you give an example of a person or a couple different types of people, what they might have gone through that leads to either a secure or insecure attachment, to kind of give people insight into, how that develops? And then we can maybe flow into like how they might want to recondition it, right? Because we always want to bring ourselves back to the application of change in these podcasts as best we can. So can you go into that a little bit? Like where does that come from? Like in application, can you give an example of that?
Yeah. So if you take a child who comes from an abusive household, right? And like, we don't even have to say it's physically abusive. It's emotionally and verbally abusive, right? Mom and dad are constantly yelling at each other, constantly calling each other names. And there's just these screaming fights that go on.
Right.
Okay.
And that would never happen. This is such a hypothetical, so.
Exactly.
Right.
So you have this child, and this child is now learning, right? That mom and dad are always going to yell at each other and they're always going to yell at me. So it's waiting for when the shoe's going to drop. And that waiting for the shoe to drop is anxiety, right? Or, wow, this is a really good moment right now. Mom and dad are really happy, but I know it's not going to last. So I can't enjoy this too much because this is not secure. So it's eventually something's eventually going to happen, right? So take this child, and this child goes through middle school, high school, college, right? And it is battling anxiety the whole time. Probably doesn't even know it's anxiety. It's probably been going on its whole life, that it just, like, this is just the way I am, right? How many times have you heard, this is just the way I am?
Right.
Eventually, like, that's their worldview. Their worldview is now ingrained that the world is not safe. And what that means too is, like, if the world is not safe, that goes from work, that goes to going to the supermarket, that goes to intimate relationships, that's relationships with our sibling, right? That's every single avenue in our world. So take that person, right? They come into our office and they explain this backstory and they explain everything. And I will explain to them, like, this is your worldview. Do you agree with it? So on and so forth. The application part and how you start to change it is, like, we have to start with the I from that individual. It's inward, right? So it's like belief systems, core beliefs. Like, okay, let's first label what they are. What are your belief systems? And they'll tell me the belief systems. And I'll ask them, like, are they actually your belief systems, or are they your parents' belief systems, or your grandparents' belief systems, or society's belief systems, right? And then I ask them, like, do you even agree with the belief system? So many people have belief systems that they don't even agree with, but that's what they were raised with. So they're just like, oh, this is my belief system now. Like,
right.
No, it doesn't have to be.
Right.
But you start to pick apart those beliefs and those core fundamentals that we believe about the world and about ourselves and about our way of the world. And once you kind of get to that point and you really start to identify things that we agree with, things that we don't agree with, and we start to make our own beliefs, our own interpretations, then you could start building upon other things, right? Then we could start looking at that anxiety a little bit, because the anxiety is always going to be there if the worldview is always there.
Right.
Like, you can't have an insecure worldview and have no anxiety. It's impossible.
I think that's well said. I think it's possible over time that you can, rewire a good bit of the brain, maybe not those foundational super highways, right? But you can build, like, smaller highways or smaller roads. Like, instead of I-95, we have the Florida Turnpike. Instead, like, we have the parkways in Long Island, things like that, where there are healthy roads that are built over time, but we tend to go back to the old stuff all the time too, if that makes sense. Like it's a little healthier. I'm able to get through it. I'm able to cope with it. Why doesn't it fully go away, right? I went to therapy. I talked about my belief system. I said what I want my new belief system to be. And I felt so good. And when I was in therapy, it seemed really managed. I really didn't have to cope that much. I felt nervous. I felt angst, but it wasn't like a diagnosis of anxiety where there was serious dysfunction in my life. So how do I get to that next level? How do I transcend anxiety? We talked about that in one of the previous episodes. Like, there's coping and there's transcending, where you don't have anxiety anymore. You get nervous, you have angst, you feel anxious, but you do not have dysfunction. You do not have panic attacks, right? So there, and obviously it's not just panic attacks that
of course.
are required for this, but in different areas of life, there's dysfunction. So how would we go to that next level of, all right, I worked on my beliefs. I tore myself down to the I statements. I've had it. I'm done. I can't keep living this way, right? Like, and that's, I think, a huge part of it for a lot of people too. That just that decision to say, no more. I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. I think any change comes a lot from that. Just that decision to get firm with oneself and say, no more. We're done. So to get to that next level, how do we do that? Where would you go with that client? Ideally, they're still coming in to see you, right? But sometimes it takes someone to go off on their own and realize, like, oh, I guess I haven't transcended this. I still need some work, right? Or they leave therapy, So go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're good. So a lot of times too, and I don't think like either coaches or therapists or counselors, like us, the professional, I don't think we realize that, like, we hold a really special place in these people's hearts, because we are the first, sometimes the first example of what a secure attachment looks like. So I will use our relationship as an example through other examples and sessions, right? Because the goal is, when you're working with someone who has all these insecure attachments, is they need to start making some secure attachments. They need to learn that process, and they need to learn how to trust others and trust themselves and trust their judgments and all that stuff.
Right.
A lot of times too is like, people's thoughts, I don't think we give enough credit to what our thoughts also do to us, right? Like you're saying, say it's that person's like, I did all this, I went to therapy, and I worked through the things I needed to work through. I don't know why this is still happening. It's probably the thoughts, right? It's what I always say, it's what you feed yourself. What are you feeding yourself every single day? Is it worry? Is it anxiety? Is it pessimism? Is it just not being sure of yourself, right? Like our internal thoughts and that internal dialogue in our head then impacts our feelings and how we feel about things. And then that impacts our behaviors of things, right? And then that's how we're acting in the world. That's what we're giving out. So like all of that, then like I work through the thoughts, like what are your exact thoughts? And I will give an assignment to a lot of my clients too, because they might not even know it's a thought record. Track your thoughts for a week. Thoughts that feel a little bigger or a little angst or a little depressed or whatever it is, write the thought down, right? And just bring in this list of thoughts. And then we could start to work on it. Like, okay, it seems like you're having a lot of worrisome thoughts throughout the day. And maybe they're all related to self-esteem. Then we got to work on that self-esteem, because then once that self-esteem is in a good spot, those thoughts aren't going to be happening. You know what I mean? So then I pick apart the thoughts, all thoughts. And it's, the thought record is a really good tool for a lot of people just to start to see where they're falling, because then you could work within that, right? Like if you don't know where you're actually at, you can't do any work. So like figure out where you're at. Let's start doing some work and see how that works out.
Right. It's like, first step is if I put a math problem on the board that we had to solve, right? This anxiety is a problem we want to solve. First step is there a math problem on the board? Oh, awareness. Okay, there's a math problem on the board. Step one, awareness. There's a problem. And then what do? We balance the equation. We isolate the variables. We solve for X eventually. But in terms of simplifying the equation, it's like that's what we're doing when we're looking at these patterns. We're kind of isolating the variables. We're finding where the pattern really is, so we know what to dive into. We know what variable we're solving for and where to go with it. Does that make sense? Like something like that. So it's so, it's the best way to put it. It's so important to look at ourselves objectively in these moments and to help the person who's helping us to see things even more clearly by externalizing the internal thoughts or externalizing the internal feelings, or something along, because there's a very big difference between someone who's feeling all the anxiety in their chest and their heart, and they're constantly having palpitations, and somebody who's constantly feeling it in their throat. That I would go to different places with those people in terms of coping mechanisms. I would go to different places in terms of cause. Right? There are people that get lumps in their throat or issues in their they have a nervous tick, or like I did in my throat or my mouth all the time. Oral fixation, where I'm biting my nails and I'm chewing on something, or I'm smoking. I'm always smoking. Whatever my bad habit is, it has to do with something oral. Well, there's something there. There's something in regards to you not speaking your truth. Right? There's nothing random. There's something in regards, maybe you weren't heard as a child. Maybe the trauma, the insecurity, the anxiety has something to do with what you've said. So now you are doing what you can to, close off that energy in your throat. That's just one example of, where I might go. But I wrote it down when you said it, because it's so good. It's so important. It's something I even wrote a little bit down about before this. The word insecurity, like an insecure attachment. You kept saying, you were kind of interchangeably using the words secure and safe, or insecure and not safe, right? And you think about the word synonyms: insecure, not safe, right? If that's my worldview, it doesn't matter what's going on around me. The world is unpredictable, so it doesn't matter what I've seen. It doesn't matter what's real right now, because at any moment, what I don't realize is the ball could drop and my mom could yell at me. When you're 2, That's true. That's terrifying. When you're completely dependent on your family as a young child, when you're developing these anxious thought patterns or insecure, unsafe, foundational core beliefs, it's an imperative that we realize when we're, up until age really 3, 4, 5, there's zero sense of independence. I mean, you start to get that independence at like 2, 3. That's where terrible twos come from. But really, it is terrifying to a 1 or 2-year-old when they're getting yelled at or when their parents are yelling and it has nothing to do with them. And we're not going to be perfect with this. Don't get me wrong.
No.
I'm not saying you can't ever yell, but it's very, very scary to a child. And then adding on to that is like in those moments, a lot of times the child will start crying and then the parent will yell at the child for crying because the parent's already flustered. They can't handle their own thoughts and emotions in that moment. So any extra noise it's too much. It's a straw breaking the camel's back. I'm going to freak out on this child. And it happens a lot. And then
think about so much is ingrained by that one, right? Even just stopping at that point, so much is ingrained. We now learned it's not safe to cry. I can't cry. If I can't cry, that also means I can't have my own emotions. So shutdown, avoidance, all of those internal triggers start happening and we don't even realize it's happening because we think this is how we have to do it because that's how mom or dad or whomever, teachers sometimes, doctors, right? It's not just always, attack on mom and dad.
Right.
But that's what we're learning. And as a child, those learned things follow us. There's no way it can't. You know what I mean? And there's so many times too, like you'll hear someone in session, like, I have a great life. I have a great job, a great wife, great kids, a great house, right? I'm not sure why I'm still battling this. Everything's good. From the outside looking in, I made it. Why am I still going through? Because that's how much these internal things really hit us and really affect us.
Yeah, you have a perfectly pruned, beautiful tree, but there's roots that are rotting and you're not taking care of them. Eventually, this foundation's going to crumble. So we need to go there. We need to look at this. And that's when people realize, like, crap, like I can't stand on 2 feet anymore. I can't stand on one leg anymore. I got to figure out how to stand on 2 feet to roll with the metaphor. So, that's so insightful.
A lot of this work too is, and I don't want people to get intimidated from the work because of how we're talking about it. But a lot of this work, like once you start it, does move pretty quickly because these light bulb moments and these insights just start flowing. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's why that happens. Well, if that's why that happens, then that's why, you know what I mean? Like you start to connect some of these webs in your brain and you're like, aha, like this makes so much more sense. I have such a better handle on it.
Right. And obviously the severity of the anxiety is going to differ. Right. I had someone who came in, it makes me think of a client of mine. And I only saw him for like maybe 4 months at most, 5 at most, but I would say like somewhere between 3 and 5 months. And he came in and he said, like, I've had anxiety my whole life. And it's gotten to the point where it's just like, it's almost unmanageable. It starts to, I can feel myself getting, I haven't had panic attacks in a long time, but I can feel it getting close to that. It happens when I'm in my, at my job. It happens when I'm with my family. It doesn't really happen with, my partner, but et cetera, he's just describing it. And what ended up happening, he was so committed to working on it and transcending it, and I said that to him first session. I was like, we can start now. We don't have to just explore and analyze and talk about it. I mean, we can get right to brass tacks and start reconditioning your brain. We can. And it sounds like that's where you are. And he was like, yes, give me homework. What do I do? And that was it. And he downloaded, what did he download? He downloaded the Calm app and started doing meditations twice a day. Started doing them before bed, things like that. He focused a lot on, like, every time he wanted to avoid something, he would face it. He would feel nerves, but he would just face it. Whether he failed miserably, like, it didn't matter. He started being a yes man. He started saying yes to things that, he otherwise would avoid throughout his life. He started also being a no man in certain ways with his family, saying no with certain things that he normally wouldn't say no to. And after 3-4 months, he's like, I've really got a handle on this. I don't feel it much anymore, if at all. Of course, I get nervous and I feel angst, but it goes away. I've learned to talk to, like, the inner child in me. I talk to that kid, just like we've practiced. I talk to him and I soothe him and I remind him who he is. And where these feelings are coming from in his childhood and his infancy and his youth. And, you know, I remind myself to look at my mom and look at my dad and where this stuff really comes from. And it's, you know, so he takes himself, like he's working on the fruit and pruning the tree, but he goes to the root. Like he did it all, and he was committed. And no joke, after four months, maybe 5 at most, when we were meeting like every other week and it was just kind of maintenance, he was like, yeah, I think I'm good. And I said to him, I think you are too. I said, sucks for me, I'm losing clients because I'm good at this. Damn, you know. But but it was like, it was so rewarding to see, like, he committed to the work, and look what happened. You know, not everybody
self-determination. Yeah. That's he was at his breaking point of, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right.
I need to figure out a different way because the way I've been doing it is not working. That is total self-determination. He was determined to make this a change. He was determined to say, I want homework. I want this. I want that, right? He made that happen. You gave him, you gave him the highway to do it on, and he made it happen.
Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people believe that some of these things need to stick with them forever. And like, I'm going to go back to what I said before, like, this is just the way I am. I love hearing that, but I hate hearing that in the same time in my sessions, because it's like, somebody told you that this is the way you are and you held on to that story and that's been your story ever since. Like, why? We get one life. Like, why are we not seeing ourselves as worthy enough to do some of this work or to do some of this change? And I know it's like, this could be another 60 minutes, fear of change and fear of all that stuff, but it is so doable in so many ways to work on some of this stuff, right? The fear of change is understandable, but like, thriving is also a really big option that I think more people need to see.
Yeah, well said. Like, surviving versus thriving. Oh my goodness, what a thought, huh?
Yeah.
Going through the motions versus actually creating my life. Mimicking what was taught to me, believing what others told me, as opposed to choosing my reality. Wow. Oh, that's empowering. Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. It seems so simple sometimes in hindsight after we've worked through it, but when we're in it, the mind doesn't allow it to be simple, because it's chaos, it's terror, it's, a whirlwind of fear and the balls that can drop, what ball is going to drop next. It's terrifying. It really is. So yeah, when we talk about security and we talk about insecurity, I'm very big on talking to clients about self-confidence or self-trust. You said the word trust, trusting oneself, trusting life itself, right? And our relationship with ourself tends to be, and feel free to disagree with this, but I think you would agree, our relationship with ourself, our beliefs about ourself are and tend to be mirrored into life itself. I don't see much difference between the two. So if I don't trust myself, I don't trust life. And if I don't trust life, I don't trust myself.
Correct.
Right? They're kind of interchangeable a lot of the time.
They go hand in hand.
They're very much a mirror, right? So when we talk about security or insecurity, I'm very big on talking about consistency and self-confidence. So to me, self-confidence is the same as self-trust to a large extent, right? If I'm confident in something, I know that I'm good at it. I know what to expect. I know what game I'm going to bring. I know that I can do it. I believe in myself, right? There's maybe not synonyms with trust, but it's very close to it. Self-confidence and self-trust. And the only way to build trust is through consistency. It's the only way. Think, like, who do you trust in your life? The most reliable, most consistent people. They're not going to be perfect, but that's who you trust. What do you trust? Well, I trust my car. I trust my home. Why? Because they show up every day and they do their job, other than the one day a year my battery doesn't work because it was freezing out or something along those lines. So I go to that consistency, like helping people get grounded in some commitments and consistency to build self-confidence, which is, one of the potentially rotting roots of this tree that leads to anxiety, at least in my eyes. A lot of the time, I'm very big on that.
And then the consistency that you're talking about, it also then creates a pattern, right? And we love patterns. We do. We love when things are the same in a sense every day, and things are constantly showing up, like you're saying.
Right.
But I agree with you with the like the consistency part and the confidence part. And I always try to tell people as well, is like, we have to, if we don't believe in ourselves, and if we don't, I won't even say love ourselves, but believe in ourselves to a point, we're going to have a really hard time navigating through some of these barriers. Right? Like the I is so important in so much of this. And then, like you're saying, like the patterns and the confidence that falls, away from that too, of the other roots, like, yeah, equally as important. But I think for somebody who's always battled with anxiety or feels like they are going to be on medication the rest of their lives because this is just the way it is, like, I encourage those people to reach out to somebody to talk to and just see if they could break some of these limiting beliefs and break some of these barriers that have consistently been getting in the way, because I think it's something that everyone's worthy of, right? Like, we're worthy of more than what we've been giving ourselves. So
right. And if it seems overwhelming or daunting, or you've just gone so far down the rabbit hole of anxiety or depression that you can't even get out of bed to a lot of days, you can start with small things, like just commit to getting out of bed, even if it's for a second, and making the bed. Even if you get right back in and unmake it, get in the habit of that every day. I tell clients all the time who ask me about book recommendations or homework stuff, like I say to them, I would rather you read half a page a day than 40 pages on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather you get consistent with the habit and make it quality in that moment for 5 minutes over quantity, and then it's about that consistency. It's just so important. The concept of consistency. And like you said, the brain is hardwired for patterns. It knows that if there are patterns, well, survival is kind of guaranteed if I know what the patterns are, because then I can predict and I know what to do. So
then it's not unknown. You're eliminating the fear of the unknown.
Right. And that's exactly where I was going to go with it. You took the words out of my mouth. You defined anxiety in large part as like fear of the unknown. And I think that was like the first episode we were talking, but with fear of the unknown, there's always going to be unknowns in life. Always. You can set it up so that, they're minimal, but there's always going to be unknowns to some extent. So if I trust myself, if I'm secure in myself, the unknowns don't matter because I trust. I'm good. I know that I got this. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be nervous, not going to be a little uncomfortable. My brain is not going to tell my body to like be on edge because I need to be more alert, more aware, little adrenaline's pumping maybe, again, because we do need to make sure we survive, but there's no overestimated threat to my life because I've consistently worked on being more secure with myself, trusting myself, speaking and owning my truth, going to my roots, knowing who I am, knowing where this comes from, looking at my consistency, reminding myself of my consistency, praising myself for my consistency, tracking my consistency. These are things that they work. They freaking work. Like I don't know who's listening. I've legitimately transcended anxiety. I have. Nobody can tell me I haven't. How did I do it? I tracked my consistency. And when I'm not consistent, it comes back. I don't go into full panic attack mode or have dysfunctional anxiety, but I start to feel it deep, and I feel those heartbeats. I'm different.
Oh yeah,
different, and I'm more on edge than I want to be. I'm a little reactive to people. You know what I mean? If I'm playing, if I'm on the golf course, I'm yelling at myself more than I normally would. Why? Well, there's a reason for it. You're not secure because you haven't been consistent. So I don't know if I went too hard on that, but that felt important.
I was going to tell you to stop yelling at me, but
stop yelling at me.
Perfect.
It's all about you.
You're shouting. I don't like it. So,
this series has been freaking delightful. That's like my word of the week. I think I used that the other day. And it really has. It's just been, I've enjoyed every episode. I've clearly, you've heard it last session. Like I had light bulb moments in these episodes. And I'm excited to open up the Q&A to anyone who's listening. You're welcome to email us. It's unleashedpotentiallifecoaching@gmail.com. That's Jessica. You could, if you say Dear Jordan, then you make the mistake. She won't take it personally. But there are worse things to be called than Jordan. Let's be real.
Yep.
And then there's my email, which is Jordan M. Nacht, Jordan MNACHT @gmail.com. There's no periods or hyphens or anything in the words in either of the emails. Send us your questions. Send them in. We're going to review them. We're going to review the questions in group. We're going to ask if anybody has questions for us. If you're listening and you know us personally, you can text us your questions. We are excited to go through the Q&A in a very applicable type of podcast the next time. So, outside of that, any final thoughts, reminders, motivational rants like I just went on, like what, anything you got for the listeners here?
I would just encourage people to reach out. Doesn't have to be you, doesn't have to be me, but reach out to somebody and start doing some of this work if you resonate with some of the things that we were talking about. And maybe some hope. I would love to give some hope to others of like, you can do this. It is not impossible. You could do it. You just have to try. Just show up. Show up. And that's all you got to do.
Right. Which happens to be the episode 5 that we released on YouTube and Podbean and Spotify and Apple this week. Showing up, episode 5. Feel free to listen to it. So anyone who's listening, thank you so much for being someone who is looking at themselves, looking at their life, even thinking about, even if you haven't taken steps, just thinking about leveling up and giving yourself more than you deserve. We applaud you, we respect you, we appreciate you, and we are here for you, for sure. So everybody have a great day. We'll see you all next week. Don't forget about the Q&A. We'll take it from there.